Hello and welcome to Zero to Traction, a podcast about how first-time founders create companies that scale. I'm one of your regular co-hosts, JDM, aka Josh David Miller, here with my other regular co-host, Cameron Law. Cameron, how are you this morning?
Doing wonderful. As always, great to be in the studio here with you, and looking forward to our conversation today and supporting founders in their entrepreneurial journey.
And so I understand you did some yard work this weekend.
Yes, yeah, mainly yesterday. We're tackling our front lawn, and it's been quite an endeavor. And it's as you peel back the layers of the onion, it's one thing to the next, but it's kind of, you got to make this chaos to then get progress. And so definitely feeling a little sore, but excited about the progress that we've made. And I think by the end of next Saturday, we'll have a new Chinese pistache and a lawn in the front yard. And so we won't be the house on the corner, or not on the corner, but on the street, that everyone's like, what's going on there? Just with dirt and all the things. So we're excited to have that done.
Well, not to torture a metaphor too far, but we're going to talk about what that has to do with entrepreneurship. We have a lot of cool stuff planned for what we are calling the "That's more than I bargained for" edition of the Zero to Traction podcast. And I think the probably the biggest way to maybe frame this is to talk about debate the core concept of, like, there's a right tool for the job, there's a wrong tool for the job, there's a way to misuse a tool for the job. So maybe we could talk about some examples for a while, go through some of the things that we see all the time, and then kind of maybe end with how that all connects back together into a simple principle that people can use to avoid using the wrong tool or using the tool incorrectly. So when you think about tools and entrepreneurship and the right tool for the job, and kind of, heading down this long path of, this is going to take a half a day and I've been working on it for 6 months, type of syndrome. Like, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you?
Right. Well, I think, oftentimes when you get started, it's like, oh, here's the tool that you need to get started in whatever part of that entrepreneurial journey you're in, whether that's, I'm from idea or, hey, I'm getting full-fledged into fundraising, and here's tools to help you in that part of the journey as well. And so I think the two that initially come to mind, they're pretty standard, is the, say, lean canvas, business model canvas, and then the pitch deck, which are really powerful tools, but if you use them right. And so I think one of the big challenges that we often see founders do, and I think this kind of comes from traditional business thinking of, like, oh, I'm going to just create a business plan and I'm going to go forward, and therefore that's my strategy for the next 5 years, and as long as I stick to it, it'll come to fruition. And when we play more in a startup space where there's more unknowns, those tools can't just be a one and done type of tool. It's really about the iteration that you're ultimately applying and using. And so it helps you source assumptions, and then therefore the hypotheses you need to be testing. And so I think, as we look at kind of comparing it to, my Sunday day was like, you start heading down a path to, accomplish some sort of goal or learning in relation to your business. In this case, is like, oh, I'm taking out the roots. Well, it's like, I need this tool to uncover this information, or to be able to take out this root because of the way that it was situated, right? And so as we start to apply these tools, they're not just one and dones. We really need to understand the iterative nature, and that it's not just as we'd say, a checkbox of, I've done my lean canvas and therefore that's my business model.
What's
and
next?
All I have to do is put it on a pitch deck and raise some money. And so that's kind of, I think, one of the big challenges that we see, and not that you're sourcing those hypotheses. And so would love to turn it to you to kind of, one, how are those, maybe those two particularly, and I think they're often interlocked. One, you kind of have these business models, but then you have it more visually represented in like a pitch deck, and obviously how you're incorporating progress in relation to that.
Yeah. So a few things in mind. So you started out with, like, okay, there's like the pitch deck and the lean canvas or business model canvas. I think we've talked about the pitch deck a lot, recently,
Mhm.
last month, we on the I think it was the your pitch is not your business edition, like we broke down like why the pitch deck is oftentimes the wrong tool to found years. So we probably don't need to dive too much into the pitch deck side of things in this episode, but the business model canvas is really interesting because you mentioned like that the iterative nature of it. And that's something that is, I think, just neglected, like literally 95% of the time. Like most just don't do that with the business model canvas. And it becomes this like thing that we do. It's week one of our accelerator program or week one of our incubator program, and we do it. Here's our canvas, and then we put it on a shelf. It's done, and we kind of move on. And there's this like concept in innovation called the horizon, and I'm forgetting where this come from. It might have been Peter Drucker, but if you go back to the 1940s and the 1950s, and you did like strategic planning, right? Like there were these giant companies literally had these divisions called strategic planning, where you would have like C-suite type executive running these departments of strategic planning, and they would be planning for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years in the future for how they wanted to situate themselves in the market and what's going to make these like really long-term profitable companies. And it worked. Like that was a very successful thing that was not like crazy. That worked back then. And that's because if you think about like the horizon of the earth, like the before you couldn't see anymore, right? Because the you have the curve of the earth, like you're standing on the beach and the ocean goes, and at some point the ship's disappearing behind it, the horizon line. The horizon's really far away, and it was 30 years away. And so like and at that point it was where it started to curve. So we can kind of make reasonable inferences about what's right on the other side of that curve still. We can't see what's all the way on the other side, but that's 50 years in the future. But we can see out a long, long, long ways, and then we can sort of infer a little bit past that, right? We know standing here on, like we just go to the California coast and look out, we know right beyond that horizon isn't Japan, right? Like it's not right there. We can make reasonable inferences about it. But what's happened over time is that horizon has gotten much shorter, right? As like think about the like widespread adoption of technology just in your lifetimes. Those of you listening, like think about how dramatically technology has shifted. I'm going to assume most people listening to this podcast are probably 20 years old or more. So like just think about like the last 20 years, and that's it from 2004 to 2024, and just the dramatic 2004 before the iPhone, before smartphones. There were not even Blackberries back then, at least not in the sense that like we traditionally think about a Blackberry. There were Nokia phones with Snake on them, I think was what we had at the time, right? And just think about how much technology has changed. So can you do strategic planning with that? No, of course not. And like that's ridiculous. And that's because of the fast pace of innovation. You see that also reflected in that if you look at the Fortune 50, like the top 50, most valuable companies in the world, their tenure, like how long they stay in the Fortune 50, used to be really long, and now it's much shorter. And so we have just this massive turnover in companies. So like 50 years ago, we didn't have Apple, like that was a thing, or Samsung, Google, Meta. None of these companies, Microsoft, none of those companies were in that. And so like we're getting this really fast turnover by this nature of innovation. So tie that back to startups, and what everybody's doing is innovation. Like you're literally not, it's not just like innovation is affecting you and affecting your markets, because of course it is, but it's that you are literally doing something innovative. Your horizon's this long, like what you actually know is this big. And so you have to constantly be adapting and learning and iterating. And so when you create this like thing of, this is what we think the business is, this is our model, and whatever that looks like, whether you do a business model canvas or a lean canvas, or you do a startup core, which is what I often do with startups, like whatever tool you end up using, like once you draw that, it's for a horizon this big. And if you just do that one time, you're missing out on the massive value of looking at that, saying, what's our risky assumptions on here? What do we know? What do we not know? And every time we get data back, going back and modifying the model to see, how does this change things? Oh, you know what? We were wrong about this particular channel. We thought we could really reach customers on these channels. It turns out that not to be true. Does that alter our value proposition? Does it alter our customer segments? Does it alter our ability to make money on this thing? Our internal, like our core competencies, are those shifted by this? All the resources that we need, everything can be impacted by these small changes. And because we just do this checkbox thing, which 95% of founders do, we never learn from the new things that we're learning. Our learnings become so narrow, even though they have really broad impacts on things we're doing. So I really wanted to like triple underline, highlight, double click on all of the like, we need to just use this as a cyclical process. The business model canvas is a cyclical tool. And if you're not doing it as a cyclical tool, you might as well not do one at all.
I love that. Well, I love the horizon example or analogy, however you want to put it. I hadn't heard of that before, so I like having that context. And I think what stands out to me is that changing horizon is just how quickly the demand side changes as well, right? If the speed of innovation is so quick, if you're bringing a new innovation to market, partly the shifting need of, if you're going direct to consumer, how quickly that's shifting based on what they're already doing. So your competitive landscape shifts, and so where do you fall in the noise of new technologies coming into that? And then similarly with the adoption that businesses are taking in to be competitive, right? To stay in that top threshold year over year, they're having to adapt and either build new technologies themselves or start to procure it. And so always having that at the forefront of your kind of risk, right? And so it's like, if they're constantly changing, yes, there's market opportunity that you could be providing that solution, but also as quickly as you could be the opportunity, you could be behind the scenes of things. And so really, I'd love to kind of turn it back to you. And I know we talked a little bit about, the lean canvas and the business model canvas, which is kind of like the overall, like, hey, here's the assumptions around my business model and kind of where I'm at. How are other tools like, say, like the customer persona and how those things again, those are iterative in nature, but not just like where you create a persona and then therefore that's who I will be targeting and build this marketing campaign. It's actually really that like go to market strategy, and how do I understand the nuances of that? And so how do you find founders or entrepreneurs use that tool in the wrong way? And then what does it look like when on the other side of it, it is what they bargained for because they use that tool in the right way to help them get to where they need to be?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and that's because it's hard to talk about any one tool in isolation because everything's so interconnected, which is the point, right? Like that, one of the big mistakes I think founders make is that they treat everything as they standalone boxes. Like, this is what I think my customer is, and this is what I think my go to market strategy is, and this is what I think my value proposition is, and this is what my revenue model is, and like we're gonna do all these things as separate. And then as we get learnings back on any of them, they don't like. Those changes don't ripple across, and that leads to a lot of stagnation in businesses, and then a lot of it's really struggling to find product market fit is like a really common way that manifests itself. But here's like this, like, put into specific relief. So a really common mistake for personas is the same exact mistake that people make with a value proposition canvas and or any type of value proposition design exercise, and the effects of it are different, but the mistake is the same. And so the mistake is context. So oftentimes when somebody's looking at, like, let me understand my customer, they're like, a founder literally just sent me one of these the other day where they were like, hey, take a look at my personas. And the persona was 100% focused on their product. So it was like, they want a tool that, and they want their lives to be made easier by, and everything's in the context of their business. And there's nothing in that persona that didn't have anything to do with the business, except maybe their age or something like that. But like, that was it. Like, and value proposition will do the same thing. So they'll list all of the things that a customer wants that have to do with their product. And then they'll look at, if you just take like the canvas itself, just as an exercise, they'll look, we got perfect parity. Like, on this side of the canvas, we have these 10, and we have these exact same 10 mirrored on the other side of the canvas. And like, that's really good. Obviously, that's product market fit. And it's like, well, no, because you did it backward. You created the product list and then you reverse engineered that onto the customer. You lost the context of what was happening in their lives. And so in both senses, it's like, we don't understand our customer well enough to figure out how, like, what they're like absent us, so that we understand how our product and the value proposition that we're creating is contextualized within the context of their lives. So here's some examples. So on the value proposition design side, if you're doing a canvas, it's kind of the easiest way to talk about it, but any value proposition exercise will apply to this too. Like, iceberg is the same thing. Is we'll have this like whole list of like, here are my my expected gains, or here are the current pains that I'm encountering. Let's just talk about pain, for example. So here's my current pain. And so they'll create this list of all these pains. And if you understand within the broader context of their life, here are the top 10 pains that they have. Those top 10 pains are not equal, and you can rank them, right? The customer will rank them. Some problems are more important to them than others. Some things are a bigger deal to them than others. Some are more severe, some are more urgent, some are more severe and urgent, and those are the ones at the top of the list. And it's not important that you're solving all 10 problems in their life. No product can do that, right? But so you're going to solve 3 problems in their life, maybe, right? Something like that, 3 big problems in their life. And if you're able to do that, that's great. But if those 3 problems are at the bottom of their stack of 10, your product is not going anywhere. No one will ever buy. People will seem interested and then they'll never buy because they don't have the either sufficient severity or more often the urgency needed to do that. But if you don't know, if you're not doing that within the context of their life, you don't know that they're at the bottom of the list because they're the only ones on your list. All you had on the list were the ones that you were solving. And so you don't understand that you're actually designing a product that nobody is going to buy because you don't understand what?
It is a problem to design it that way.
It is a big problem designed that way. And so, right. So like that's how that ends up manifesting itself. And in the context of a persona, it like ties back to your go-to-market strategy and messaging that's going to work and all of those other things because you did this so narrowly within the context of your product that you're neglecting what it is about them that is that drives them to purchase. Where are they hanging out and who are their influences and what does that have to do with this? And like are they using this product at the end of the day because the outcome that they're getting is some freedom in their life, right? That's separate from they're using the product for this, but you're not going to understand that they're getting freedom from using your product unless you understand what their life is like in the broader context and the role that you're playing within their own aspirational visions of themselves and their own intrinsic motivation. And so like that's just like context matters. And if you do either one of those exercises without the context of the actual customer, like you're just wasting your time.
Right. Yeah, I think the like big thing I'd pull out of there is that your customer isn't thinking about your product all day, every day, right? And that's kind of where that, if you build your persona to your product and or service, right there, it's almost as if like that's all they think about is solving this thing and that your product is always on their mind versus, in a likelihood of a day that only comes across their mind every now and then, or understanding that nuance is really, key to building those personas. One of the other things I was thinking about as you're kind of chatting was, I think one of the challenges with tools is, and we've also designed like our startup challenge in the way to address some of this, but like sometimes it feels like we make progress because we're using the tool, right? We've like created
Right.
our business model canvas, we've created our persona, and it feels good because we've like put something on paper and like that's progress, but we haven't like actually like done anything with what has been elicited from that. And so like tying it to our analogy was like, oh, I bought a cool a thing from Lowe's or something, and now I just want to go use it, right? And so it's just like
Yeah.
I with no intentionality to understand how it's actually making us take a progress forward in understanding our business. And so what are some of the ways, obviously entrepreneurs can plug into the startup challenge and learn some of those behaviors, but like what are some of the like mindset shifts people can make or address when they're starting to use these tools so they don't fall into the trap of like, okay, I made my business model canvas. I do see some connection to the persona I developed, but like the real work is going out and setting up those hypotheses and tests to actually get that information and come back to the drawing board. Like what are some recommendations or ways to make that a behavior versus it just being like, yes, I continue to check the boxes of these things and, I feel satisfied. I shared it with, Cameron or JDM or whoever, and they gave me feedback on it, but maybe I'm not the customer. So it doesn't really matter what feedback I really gave you outside of maybe pinpointing some like gaps that I identified. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you answered it in your own question, but I'll tease it out. And so it's a couple things. So one, this idea of like staying busy but not making progress is one that actually drives me nuts. I have a whole term that I use for it. I call it procrastivity. So it's
Yeah.
like it's things that feel really productive, but they're not productive. They're just procrastinating the thing. And so like that might jar in your mind, like, oh, what are we procrastinating on? Well, it's like actually learning something. So if we're spending time creating business model canvases or writing code for an MVP or whatever it is, at the end of the day, it's going to feel like, we're checking boxes, we have work product that we can show, like we can go, hey, Cameron, look at my persona, right? And we can do all of that. But what did we like? Did we learn anything from the market? No. And so that's where I have this principle that I have, which is I say it always has a hard and fast rule, even though the world isn't really hard and fast, but I always say it as a hard and fast rule, which is if you're not getting data from the market, you're wasting your time. If whatever you're doing right now isn't actually getting you back data from the market, you're just wasting your time. And I think that's largely true. It's almost always true, even though there are some exceptions for that. And so if you're like, well, I'm doing this business model canvas, is that helping you get data from the market? No. Are you using a business model canvas in order to identify an assumption so that you can find the riskiest part of your business in order to test that? Like, yeah, you're using the tool in order to surface what you need to learn so that you can get data from the market. And that makes perfect sense. So like, get data from the market. And there's a metric that I use. I've written about this on my traction thinking Substack in the past, but there's a metric that I think all founders should track called time to customer. And it's a team performance metric, not a startup metric. It's a team performance metric. And it's the time it takes from an idea in your head to the time you actually test that idea with customers. And so in the early days, it's like, I think people have this problem. So how long does it take to expose a customer to that? Minutes, right? Find them and talk to them. Like, that's it. And then as a startup is, much more mature, as you are in seed and series A, you're doing bigger experiments with larger groups of people, and it takes a little bit more ramp up. And so it might take a few months, to do something like that. For a gnarly idea, your time to customer might get longer, but in the early days, it's so short. So it's all about testing from the market. So that leads us to like, all right, so what does that mean? Like, what are we trying to do? And like, what are we trying to do is actually the question you should be asking. Why am I trying to create a business model canvas? Why am I creating a persona? Why am I, setting up a value proposition? Like, like, what am I trying to learn from doing that process? And we call that an hypothesis, right? And an hypothesis is specific, it's discrete, it's falsifiable, and it's specific. Like, you're testing. Like, all of the facets of it, who, how, when, what, where, right? All of that, all of those questions are answered. It's specific. And then it's discrete. You're testing one thing as opposed to a bunch of different things, because that's just how science works. And then, it's falsifiable. It has to be like unambiguously shown to be true or false through experimentation. So like, that's an hypothesis. You're saying, I want to learn, do people who look like this have this particular problem, right? Like, that's what we want to know. Or is it like, I want to figure out if this way of designing an app creates a sense of wow or magic in customers that have this particular problem, right? So like, okay, that's another hypothesis that's pretty easy to falsify. And then you say, okay, so now I have a thing I want to learn. So as you already said, Cameron, like the solution is the experiment. It's like, let me form this hypothesis. I'm going to say, this is a thing I want to learn. Then we're going to find again, keeping time to customer as short as possible. We're going to find the quickest, leanest, meanest way to test that, run an experiment with those customers, get data back, iterate on the hypothesis. If we, get really good data and validate the hypothesis, then we can set that aside, see how does that impact our overall model, whether it's a business model canvas or something else. How does it impact our model? What's the next one? Okay, here's the hypothesis of that. Here's the leanest, meanest way to test that, run an experiment. And it's just that set of cycles. That's what progress actually look like. And you mentioned the startup challenge. So like, use that as an example for like, what does that look like with this like cycles thing that we're talking about?
Yeah, I love it. I'm gonna add one quick thing, and then I can dive into the cycle. So we've often talked about you used I can't do the procrastination. I don't remember the special word. Procrastivity, was that what it was called? I liked it, but we've talked about it in Fourth Wave as like unprocessed fear, and so part of that is like trying to understand. Also, like, like there's probably a gap from like, okay, I'm doing these things because I might bring it to market and they might say they don't like it, right? And that's but it's better to know that now than when you built something and spent a bunch of time and energy and money potentially in bringing that solution to the market, and then people not telling you. And so it's a easier way to do it if you do it earlier than much later on. So I say hop in and get that feedback and information now. And so, yeah, we've talked about the startup challenge as a way to really build this behavior of testing and cycles. And so one of the ways that we start, we have, kind of people that identify what that riskiest assumptions. And so for teams that are just forming at the startup challenge, they're pretty much just an idea, right? And so part of it, the biggest risk that they're identifying is, one, are they targeting the right people that actually have the pain point that they believe they have? And so, the first earlier tests, you can build this, we give them a framework using test cards. So again, another tool, but again, it's only if you use it in the way to inform the overall model, and you see this interconnection of all of these tools. And maybe a way, we have an offering called the toolkit series, but it's really thinking of like, it's like, what am I going to pull out right now to use to gain information from the marketplace, and then maybe I have to put that tool back and pull something else out to decipher that information. But setting up, what is the hypothesis that you're ultimately trying to understand, and ultimately validate or invalidate. And I think that that's really one of the challenges that often founders make, is they don't really draw somewhat of a line in the sand to say like, hey, is my assumption right? If I went and talked to some people and they said they had these pain points, did I kind of draw a line in the sand that yes, this truly is a pain point for them, because X, it doesn't have to necessarily be percentage wise, but a good number of them did demonstrate, and that there was a pattern emerging amongst those individuals. And so as you start to get this information from the marketplace, you come back and say, okay, we've validated or invalidated it. Therefore, what did we learn? How does our model shift based on our initial understanding? And so it's like, okay, we did identify that this, individual or this set of, people do have this pain point. Now, what do we want to understand from them further? What's that next riskiest assumption and related to that? So, is it maybe related to that this they would maybe use a solution of this nature that would ultimately solve that particular problem? And that's maybe where you mock up a prototype. And that doesn't mean you have to go code a full-fledged app. It could be Figma screens. It could be hand-drawn screens, and say, hey, would show me how you would maybe use this to explore this particular pain point of yours, right? And see if it actually would go through that process. And so one of the things is, it's about getting those cycles and learning in, and that they all build on each other, and you can't necessarily progress until you've started to gain that validation. And one of the pain points is that people set it up so that they test, or that they pass the test, but they really didn't have the true confidence that that was actually validation from the market, right? And so you kind of are cheating yourself in that process, because now you're building a model that you're going to continue to grow on based on information that really was kind of risky, and that you didn't truly have that much validation for. And so I think drawing that line and being very specific and concrete about what that test is key. And yeah, happy to have you add on if there's anything there as well.
I mean, I think that's pretty great. So I'll just kind of tie everything back together in the conversation. So we're getting close to our end of time here. So I mean, 30,000 of you, like we open up by saying like, okay, right tool for the job, and there's 8 ways to like misuse tools that we see really common, and then we said we were going to come back at the end to how that. Like the reason why that happens most of the time, and we've just articulated it, like we already did it. And it's that you don't come in with a particular question, you do something because it's a checkbox. There's a lot of times when I'll ask founders why they're going through a particular exercise, and it'll be well, because this incubator I'm in, or this accelerator I'm in, or this class I'm in, or this mentor that I have said I should do it. And if you try to probe one level deeper than that, it just falls apart. And it's because there wasn't real intentionality to it. It becomes this like exercise that we're supposed to do because that's what entrepreneurs do. And so you're just supposed to do that. The antidote to that is knowing what it is that you want to learn. And what you want to learn, in theory, is the riskiest assumption that you're making right now. So what's your riskiest assumption? Okay, so then how do I put that into the format of an hypothesis? And how do I go from assumption to hypothesis? Then how do I find the leanest possible way to test that? And then how do I just do that in an iterative fashion where the learnings that I'm getting back are modifying my model? If you're doing that work, everything else just sort of falls into place. And you can make mistakes, because we all make mistakes, and everybody's gonna make mistakes. If we start at makes mistakes, you're gonna fail all the time. Like I fail every day. It's just the nature of things. That's not what it's not about that. It's about not wasting your time doing a bunch of things that just didn't matter at the end of the day, that aren't actually going to make progress.
Right. Love it. I think that was a good bow you put on there. So thank you for tying up our conversation there. And yeah, love the discussion. And for those that are thinking of how we come up with our amazing topics here, we basically just hop on and say, what do you do this weekend? And we figure out a way to tie it to entrepreneurship and supporting you as founder.
That is a lie. We do in-depth market research. There's weeks of planning for every episode. We use AI. There's a whole set of complex things that we have our team of interns do, and then come back together to do what is obviously a highly scripted episode.
Yes, as you can tell.
Well, that does bring us to the end of our time today, but it would not be Zero to Traction without some frivolous thoughts. So
you kick us off. You always.
I'm going to kick us off now. Okay.
Yeah,
so this is what happens every time you tell me to kick off, because you haven't done your homework, and this time I haven't done my homework. So here we are. But the podcast version of this is definitely going to have this little part here edited out or down. I would just say, like, okay, so here's something that it's just on my mind, and it's not unprocessed fear, but it's unprocessed something. And it's like, there are some founders that I encounter that are just not coachable. And I largely architect my professional life to avoid working with those people. And because, like, nobody's getting anything out of it. I'm not getting anything out. I don't get any value out of that relationship. They're not getting any value out of that relationship. It's just like, you do you, best of luck. And there's a whole category of people. If you spend any time in our space, there's a whole category of people that aren't fun to work with, and then it's like there's the people who just want to learn when that's not contextually appropriate. Like the people, like, I don't care about, like I do work with, high school kids or college kids sometimes, and it is stage appropriate to just want to learn, and they are crazy fun to work with, right? It's like, but when it's not stage appropriate, when people are like, oh, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, like, this is what I want to do, I want to build my business, but all they really want to do is learn, it's not fun. So this is like a whole category of people that we just, like, you learn to identify, these are the people that I want to surround myself with. I want to surround myself with these fun people, with these doers, who are going to make, forward progress, and within whom I can make an impact. And sometimes, though, you can't do that, and people just end up in the space. And so I have some people like that I'm dealing with right now. And there's this, like, and sometimes it becomes about, like, okay, well, I actually can't get through to this person. And, like, that's just going to have to be okay. And that's a very difficult thing for somebody like me to process, that I'm unable to get through to somebody. It's almost as if it becomes an indictment of me, right? Like, that I'm, like, my powers of communication and my powers of convincing, my ability to teach and mentor and coach just fundamentally fails at that point. And it feels so wrong to just say, oh, well, they're not coachable, right? Because it takes whatever the failure is and it pushes it entirely on them. And so, like, anyway, I told you it was unprocessed, as you can see, it is unprocessed. But there's a thing there, and it doesn't happen super often, because when, again, like, we have methods where we don't put those people in our programs. With all of the, like, you and I have some fun announcements, like, coming soon, Cameron, and like we're intentionally designing so that, like, those, we don't want portcos that look like that. Like, it's just not what we do. And anyway, but every once in a while they're there, and it's like, I have to live with this, and it's fine, right? Like, first world problem. It's not like it's fine, but it's like, how do you become okay with that? And I don't have an answer to that. That's my, I guess it's not so frivolous at the
Yeah.
end of the day.
Yeah, that was a very. I think we've switched roles there. You came with the real in depth thought there, and I definitely hear you on that. And I think the challenge I often find with that is it's not that you want them to like have it. It doesn't necessarily that they have to be successful. It's just like you realize that they're continuing to do the same things, and it's setting them up for failure, and then they're associated with kind of you and your program, and that's not what you're trying to push them to do. So I think there's one of those elements, and then also just there's not that part of I think doing this work is you're investing the time and energy into supporting them, and you have kind of you know vested interest, not in necessarily a financial way, but you really want them to be successful because you're pouring the time, energy, and love into supporting them, and then to not have that be received is kind of, can I apply that energy elsewhere, right? And I think that that's kind of to a degree you have finite time and energy, so it's like, can this be better applied to someone who is open to receiving that, and actually taking action on it? So I definitely hear you and can relate as well. So thanks
Well,
for
thank you
sharing
for
that.
the
And I
therapy.
yeah, for sure. And I think the call for founders is it's all right to learn the tools and go through that process, but I think it's also understanding if you're signing up for a program that's more committed to understand and truly opt into that work, or say, hey, this isn't for me right now, and I do just want to learn the tools, because there is plenty of opportunity out there to learn those things, but finding that there are certain things, because you ultimately are going to be in a space with others that are taking that step forward, and so you often find as a facilitator you're supporting those that aren't really applying it, when you could be supporting those that are truly leaning into the experience. So with that, my frivolous thought was just going to be about fantasy football. My teams are struggling. I have one team riddled with injuries. I think I have like 4 or 5 people that are out, and so I'm not doing too well in that particular league. And then the other, I'm scoring decently, but the teams I'm playing are having their top weeks against me, and so I guess my overall defense, even though that's not controllable, is not doing too well. And it's funny that I haven't watched a single football game all year, so it's funny just to like see like no wonder you're not doing well, because you literally just look at the
Because
projections
you don't understand the market.
and exactly. I haven't done my market research. I do look at the app, and but I don't see the real live game of are they running their pass patterns and truly missing it, or is it just they're not getting the looks and all of that. But so yeah, just funny that so that's been something that's bugging me, is that I won one of the leagues last year, and now I'm at the
Mm.
bottom of the pork barrel, and so yeah, looking
So
to
in your
get some new
fantasy
luck.
football, is there money on the line?
Yeah, both of them have money on the line. So yeah, last year it paid for me to play this year and a next year. But it's one of the ways I stay connected with my college buddies. And then the other one is a new league that I joined with kind of in the broader entrepreneurial ecosystem here. So that was one that I was new and wanted to come with a strong punch, and I felt like I had a solid team, but we're just not fully clicking right now, and I haven't had the waiver wire pickups that I maybe needed to along the way. But my big bust was in one of the leagues. Patrick Mahomes has had a poor year, so and I was expecting him to do a little better, but nonetheless, that's my frivolous thought.
Well, I'm sorry that your teams are not performing up to snuff. There's a weird theme between our frivolous thoughts there about about performance standards. But we'll leave that unexplored for this particular episode. Well, that brings us to the end of Zero Detraction. Thank you guys so much for listening. Definitely appreciate, time is a finite resource, and you've chosen to spend some of it here with us, and very grateful for that trust and that flattery. If you did enjoy the episode, leave us a review in whatever platform you're listening to this. It actually really does help us out and get Zero to Traction and the hands of more first time founders, help them create companies that scale. You can also just share it with a friend. That would be great. If you just say, hey, check out this episode of Zero to Traction, share with a friend. That would be awesome. Would be forever in your debt. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for listening, as always. And Cameron, thank you so much for hopping into the studio again with me this week and recording a very carefully planned episode.
Exactly. You got it. Well, it's always a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for listening and engaging in the podcast. So we hope to be of service to you in your entrepreneurial journey.
All right. Until next time.
All righty.
Peace.
Thank you all. Cheers.